Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today is April 6th, 2020, excuse me. And we are going to go ahead and begin our next assignment. This is going to be a continuation of our Google Slides doc, where we are going into the third part of this Interdependence Google Slides, PowerPoint thing. Just a few quick things that I want to let you know. Make sure that you go through and read every single thing that I post on the Google Classroom. Go down all the way to the bottom. Look through to make sure that every assignment that you've been assigned, has been turned in. I put the grades for the other two assignments, not the lab worksheet where you built your own food chain from your environment, but the other assignments, I put them in as of this morning, April 6, 2020. The lab sheet will be going in later on. As far as submitted work, guys, you need to have these assignments turned in the day that they are assigned. Should be turned in by 11 o'clock if you're in my first period. Within that time frame of your class period is when that they should be turned in. You need to get into the habit of doing that. We are now on week 2. Playing games and all that stuff is going to slow down a lot, and it needs to start picking up with this standard agenda, because this is the way things are going to be running. I want to let you know that you will be having we are going to do a Google Meet that is going to involve a Kahoot. So we are going to have a Google Meet where we are all going to be doing Kahoot, and you will all be participating in that. I'm going to be making out a massive array of phone calls this week to every single parent that is or student that are not on this Google Classroom. All of them. It's going to be a lot of work, but I'm going to take care of it so this way I can stay in contact with everybody. With that being said, we are now, make sure that you have this video up with your Interdependence Part 3 slides. We are now moving on to Slide 2. So the first few slides are going to be review. Review from previous slides. This is Slide 2. Food chain is a hierarchy of animals where each animal is placed in a certain ecological niche based on its size and what it eats. In a food chain, we have the following: the sun, which provides all energy to every animal in the food chain, either directly or indirectly. So the sun is not on the food chain, it's outside the food chain, but it is involved with the food chain. That's why it's important that you have a sun in your food chain diagrams. Number 1, producer. Producers are animals that acquire their energy from the sun. Primary consumers are vegetarians, which eat the producers. Secondary consumers, these animals feed off of the primary consumers or the herbivores. Tertiary consumers, these animals can eat out of the primary consumers or the secondary consumers. And quaternary consumers, which are the apex predators, the top dogs on the food chain. They can consume any organism that is below that. You can pause this right now. We are now moving on to Slide 3, and I'm going to be just kind of going through this quickly. We are now on Slide 3. So I've given you now another diagram of a food chain where you're seeing the producers, the primary, secondary, and tertiary consumer. You see what is labeled as a final consumer. That should say quaternary consumer. I don't know why they didn't label it that way, but they did. And then you have decomposers. So now is when we're going to discuss decomposers. I'm going to try to go through this video quickly so that it's not longer than 10 minutes, so I can kind of keep it all in one part. So excuse me if my words for the review part is kind of quickly. Review food chain. We are now on Slide 4. A food chain is a representation of a food web is a representation of multiple food chains of all animals that live in a specific environment and how they are dependent upon one another. Your next lab grade will have something to do with a food web. So be sure that you are familiar with this topic, and we will get into that later on in the week. We learned the difference between a carnivore, herbivore, and omnivore. A carnivore is an animal that eats meat, a herbivore is an animal that eats plants, and an omnivore is an animal that eats both meat and plants. We now have another diagram of a food web or food chain. And as you can see right there, a food web is really a complex integration of different lines, because there's different predators, all in the same environment. They all eat different things. A wolf may not eat a frog, but a python would eat a frog and a wolf if it was big enough. So, this is how a food web really looks. It's a complex thing, with the interconnectivity of it is complex. And I like this particular diagram that I chose because it shows you how specific things eat certain things. You can have two apex predators in the same environment, but their diets are slightly different. That's the thing. So that has a role a little bit of the interconnectivity of the food web. We are now on to the new topic. We are now on slide 6, decomposers. So in a food chain / food web, animals sit in a specific location in the hierarchy. When a wolf hunts and kills a deer, the wolves will likely eat a certain amount of the deer, but remains of the animal are often left behind in the form of bits of flesh and meat. Those remains are then broken down by decomposers. In a food chain, decomposers are organisms that feed specifically off of the organic remains of dead animals. Decomposers play such an important role in a food chain because they act as organic waste disposers for the environment. So decomposers is what breaks down the rotting flesh. When an animal sits there and a carcass is just sitting there and it's left there, and you come back a week, 2 weeks later, or even maybe within a few days, you see a dead fish, it's out the water, it smells. 4 or 5 days later, the fish is now broken down to bare bones. It's not that necessarily that animals are coming over to that fish to eat it and bite little bits off of it. What it is that there are these decomposers that are penetrating the flesh of the dead fish, the rotting remains, and they are breaking it down. One of the reasons why dead things have an odor to them is because decomposers are eating that. They're eating that flesh, and they are producing waste. And the waste is what gives off an odor. So when you smell something that is dead, you know the way something dead, the way it smells. That smell is actually the odor of the waste from the decomposers. That's why dead things smell. Okay. We are now on slide 7. So right here I have given you 4 examples of decomposers: worms, mushrooms, insects, bacteria. It says these primary examples of decomposers include the following. Soil bacteria. So these are the decomposers that would break down a dead body in a coffin. These bacteria can be carried through the air and explain how an animal can be rapidly decomposed. So soil bacteria, that is really, when you think of decomposers, if you go outside, if you leave a fish in your room, and you leave for a week and you come back and it smells horribly, but the fish is starting to break down, there's no animals in your house to eat it. How is it decomposing? Well, these specific type of bacteria, okay, these microscopic decomposers, they play such an important role. Even if every fly and every insect and every different thing that decomposes was wiped off the face of the earth, these bacteria would still be there to break down flesh. They are so important in being able to clean up that dead matter. Decomposing flesh can carry different types of harmful bacteria and things like that. And these organic decomposers, like bacteria, soil bacteria, play such an important role in cleaning up our environments. If we didn't have decomposers, every time an animal died, the bodies and the carcasses would still be there. They wouldn't disappear. That's the whole thing. They wouldn't smell, they wouldn't disappear, they wouldn't do anything. They would just sit there and be there, and they would just remain there. That's why decomposers are so important. Insects such as flies are also decomposers. One of the reasons why you should never eat a food that a fly has landed on is because the food, they feed off rotting flesh and can carry harmful bacteria in their saliva. One time I had a bit of meat. I was eating some chicken, and I think that there was some leftover or something like that, and it was stale. And I left it outside, and my garbage can had some type of hole in it, and it cut a hole in the bag. And a piece of the chicken actually leaked out. And these flies, they were all over that chicken, and they basically totally eradicated it within a few days. So flies also act as decomposers. And number 3 says worms as well as mushrooms are also decomposers. Now, we are on slide 8. So the GIF that I gave you over there, it's basically showing you how decomposers work. So this is obviously a time-lapse video, and what you have right there, it looks to be some type of dead lizard, maybe a like a Komodo dragon, monitor lizard or something like that. But you can see how the decomposers, how they act and how they work to break down that carcass. And over time you see them moving, you see them working. You can't see that with the naked eye, but with the time-lapse thing, you can really kind of see how that works. Photosynthesis and producers. We are now on slide 9. So producers are unique among organisms because they transform the solar energy from the sun into ADP or adenosine triphosphate. So when your body has energy, when you move around and you're able to do all that, What that energy is ATP. Okay, it's not something that you need to know, but I want to give you some exposure to these terminologies so you kind of have a better, a more profound understanding of these concepts. Animals make energy or ATP to run their individual cells in their body by consuming other animals and converting their consumed flesh into energy. Okay, so that's what animals do. Now, photosynthetic organisms do it a little bit differently. Photosynthesis involves a plant taking carbon dioxide out of the air and using the solar energy from their leaves. So leaves are basically solar panels acquired from the sun to separate the carbon molecules in carbon dioxide. And then that carbon, so they use the sun's energy, they take in CO2, carbon dioxide in the air, into the plant. They use the sun's energy to give the plant energy to break the carbon molecule apart from the oxygen molecule, because CO2 is carbon dioxide. It's a carbon molecule attached to two oxygen molecules. So they break that apart, and then the sun helps the plant turn that carbon into sugar or glucose for the plant's body. And when herbivores, they feed off of that sugar, that glucose in the plant. That's what allows cows to produce their strong arms and all that, and their thick hides and their thick muscle tissue, is from eating the sugar that is found in the grass or the hay or whatever it is that they eat. And then oxygen is a byproduct. So oxygen is actually a waste product from carbon dioxide. It is the equivalent of us going to the bathroom is what oxygen is to plants. It's waste, okay? And we just so happen to, and all animals on Earth just so happen to live off of that waste. Very interesting process. So that is the idea of photosynthesis. And here is a photosynthesis diagram below, and you can kind of see the process in depth. So that is essentially what I wanted you to see for today's lecture. We are going to be having a test coming up soon, maybe as soon as this Friday. Make sure that you are studying through these slides. I'm going to post these slides in one massive presentation. Everything that we've learned up until this point is all going to be one unit on one test for this part one of this whole interdependence thing. Thank you.